The deed had rested beneath Lady Verity, Evelyn's breakfast napkin for exactly 9 minutes before her husband finally said the words she had known were coming. Redmere Park, Sussex, 1884, wore its dignity like armor that morning. The long breakfast room glowed with pale winter sun, polished mahogany, silver covers, and porcelain so thin that the light seemed to pass through it. At one end of the table sat Alistair Merrow, Duke of Halverstone, immaculate in dark mourning dress, his shoulders straight, his face composed, his newspaper folded beside his plate. At the other sat Verity, Duchess of Halverstone for 3 months, wife in name, hostess in duty, stranger in every tender particular. Between them stretched 30 feet of linen, silver, silence, and everything he had never asked her. A footman poured coffee without a sound. The butler stood near the sideboard, with his gaze fixed upon nothing. Verity had learned that great houses did not need raised voices to become cruel. Sometimes cruelty entered softly, in the scrape of a knife against toast, in the absence of a greeting, in a husband who noticed the post before he noticed his wife. She wore dove-grey silk because it was proper for mourning. Her hair was pinned smoothly at the nape of her neck, the small brass key to her writing case pressed into her palm beneath the table, warm from her skin. She had brought the deed down before breakfast, not because she wished to use it, but because something in the house had changed before dawn. The servants had moved with greater caution. The post tray had been carried in by the butler himself. Alistair had opened one letter and gone utterly still. Verity had seen the smallest tightening at the edge of his mouth. She knew that expression now. It meant the estate had bled again. It meant another creditor, another demand, another piece of Halverstone pride threatening to collapse under debts everyone pretended not to see. He did not look at her. He read the letter once, then again, then folded it with a precision that frightened her more than anger would have done. "Bad news, Your Grace?" she asked. Her voice was calm. It had taken years to make calmness sound effortless. Alistair lifted his eyes at last. They were grey, clear, and cold enough to make the fire seem ornamental. "Nothing with which you need concern yourself. I am Duchess of Halverstone," Verity said. "I believe the household concerns me." "The household, yes." He set the letter beside his plate. "The estate is another matter." The footman's hand paused above the coffee pot for less than a breath before he recovered. Verity noticed. Alistair did not. Or perhaps he did and chose not to care. That was one of the small punishments of marriage to him. She never knew whether his indifference was blindness or discipline. "Redmere Park feeds the household," she said. "Its tenants mend our roofs, send our milk, cut our timber, keep our name alive in places where London gossip cannot reach. If the estate is in difficulty, pretending I am too delicate to understand will not improve matters." Something passed through his face then. Not admiration, not affection, a harder thing, irritation touched by shame. "You speak as though affection for tenants can settle accounts." "No," Verity answered, "but contempt has never paid a debt either." The room changed. It was slight, almost invisible, yet every trained servant felt it. The butler's chin lowered. The footman stepped back. Outside the tall windows, a rook lifted from the bare branches and vanished over the frost-silvered lawn. Alistair placed his hand flat upon the table. He had beautiful hands. She had noticed on the day they married. Long-fingered, controlled, capable. In 3 months, those hands had signed letters, sealed documents, accepted wine, turned pages, and once lifted her into a carriage when the step was slick with rain. They had not reached for her since. "Lady Verity," he said, and the use of her old name struck more deeply than he could have intended. Let us not pretend this marriage was made for sentiment. Verity's breath moved carefully through her chest. I have never pretended that you married me for sentiment. Then, why this performance? He asked. Why speak of tenants and household duty as if we entered some romantic arrangement? She looked at him across the gleaming table. She had been raised in smaller rooms with fewer servants and warmer voices. She had not been raised to be foolish. Her godmother had taught her the language of papers, seals, signatures, and men who smiled while taking what belonged to women. Yet nothing in Lady Elspeth Aveling's lessons had prepared Verity for the quiet humiliation of being useful to a man who could not bear to be grateful. Because I live here, she said. Because I bear your name. Because whatever reason brought me to this table, I am not a chair you purchased to fill an empty place. A faint color rose beneath his cheekbones. Purchased? He gave a short, humorless breath. You misunderstand your position. The brass key bit into Verity's palm. She did not move. Do I? Alistair stood. The chair did not scrape. Even his anger had manners. I married you to save my estate. The words entered the room cleanly, without ornament, without mercy. For one suspended instant, everything became painfully clear. The butler's eyes closed. The footman looked down at the tray. A coal settled in the grate with a soft collapse. Verity felt no dramatic shattering, no wild rush of tears, no sudden desire to plead. Instead, she felt a stillness so complete that it seemed to belong to someone older than herself. She thought of the wedding morning at St. Anselm's Chapel, of Alistair's formal bow, of his vow spoken in a voice that could have promised anything and revealed nothing. She thought of the first dinner at Redmere Park, where he had praised her composure as if complimenting a well-trained horse. She thought of the nights when she had heard him walking the corridor outside her room, never entering, never knocking, never allowing either of them the dignity of honesty. And beneath all that, she thought of Lady Elspeth's last letter, folded in a different packet upstairs, warning her that property could reveal a man more ruthlessly than love. Verity placed her napkin on the table. I wondered when you would say it plainly. Alistair's expression shifted. Surprise, quickly buried. You wondered? Yes. She rose, not quickly, not dramatically. Her knees felt steady, and she was grateful for it. The key flashed once in her hand as she drew it from beneath the table. Alistair saw it then. His gaze dropped to the small writing case beside her chair, a dark rosewood box with brass corners and an ivory ribbon tied around its handle. He had never asked why she carried it from room to room. He had never asked many things. What is that? He said. An answer. She fitted the key into the lock. The click sounded indecently loud. The footman drew in a quiet breath. Verity opened the case and removed a flat packet bound in faded ivory ribbon. The paper was thick, legal, and old enough at the edges to have softened from many careful readings. Red wax seals marked the folds. Her name appeared on the outer sheet in a clerk's exact hand. Lady Verity Aveling, now Duchess of Halverstone. Alistair stared at it. Verity. It was the first time that morning he had used her Christian name. She hated that it still had the power to hurt. You said you married me to save your estate, she said. She laid the packet upon the linen between the toast rack and the untouched marmalade. Her fingers rested on it for one final second. Then she slid it across the table. It moved smoothly over the white cloth, past the silver coffee pot, past the folded creditor's letter, and stopped beside his hand. Then you married too late, Your Grace. His face changed before he could prevent it. The disciplined coldness fractured. Not enough for the servants to name it. Enough for Verity. "What is this?" he asked. "The deed to the endangered portion of Redmere Park." Silence descended so sharply that even the house seemed to listen. Alistair did not touch the packet. "That is impossible." "No," Verity said, "it is inconvenient." His eyes lifted to hers. For the first time since their wedding day, he looked not at the Duchess he had acquired, nor at the wife he had avoided, but at the woman who had been sitting across from him all along with a truth powerful enough to ruin his pride. "How did you get this?" "You may read it. I asked you a question, and I have answered enough for a husband who has just informed his wife she was an estate measure." The words were not loud. That made them worse. Alistair's jaw tightened, but his hand moved at last. He drew the packet toward him and broke the ribbon loose with care that looked almost reverent. Verity watched his fingers unfold the first sheet. She saw the moment his certainty failed. His eyes moved across the lines once, then returned to the beginning. His color drained slowly. Outside the breakfast room, somewhere deep within Redmere Park, a clock began to strike 9. Each note fell into the silence like a judgment. Alistair turned the second page. The creditor's letter lay forgotten. The coffee cooled. The servants did not move. Verity stood beside her chair, with her hands folded before her, every inch the Duchess he had never bothered to understand. When he finally looked up, the cold Duke of Halverstone had vanished for one unguarded second. In his place sat a man who had just discovered that the wife he had wounded might hold the only key to the home he had been trying to save. Alistair read the first page twice, because the first reading offended every certainty on which he had built the last 3 months of his life. The second reading was worse, because the words did not alter to suit his pride. Redmere Park, or at least the part of it that could still be saved from the creditors, had passed through a chain of obligation he had never seen, signed by men he recognized, witnessed by a solicitor whose caution was famous, and settled finally upon the woman standing at the far end of his breakfast table. Not upon House of Halverstone, not upon the Duke, upon Verity. The clock finished striking 9. The last note faded into the panelled room, and no one breathed too freely after it. Alistair lowered the paper by half an inch. "Leave us." The butler moved first. The footman followed. Silver lids were replaced with reverent care, though no one had eaten enough to justify the service. The breakfast room emptied in less than 20 seconds, leaving behind coffee, frostlight, and the sort of silence that belonged after a verdict. Verity remained beside her chair. She did not sit until he did. That small act of etiquette, obedient in shape and defiant in spirit, struck him with a force he was not prepared to name. "This document says, Lady Elspeth Aveling acquired the mortgage note tied to the southern lands," he said. His voice sounded controlled. It did not feel controlled inside his chest. The southern lands, the mill lease, 3 tenant farms, and the old park woods, Verity said. Not the title, not the entailed ducal inheritance, only what your grandfather and father placed at risk before it reached you. His eyes sharpened. "My grandfather and father are not here to defend themselves." "No," she answered, "and neither is Lady Elspeth. That makes truth inconvenient for everyone." He looked down again. The old paper carried the scent of wax, dust, and careful storage. The folded edge had been touched often, not carelessly, but by someone who had read it enough times to become calm before it. Why was I not told? Verity's expression did not change, yet something in her eyes withdrew another inch. "You were. Alistair's hand tightened on the page. I wasn't. 3 letters were sent to you before the wedding. 1 from Lady Elspeth's solicitor, 1 from mine, 1 from Lady Elspeth herself, written before her final illness worsened. I received no such letters. Then that is a separate mystery, a convenient one. The words escaped too quickly. He regretted them before her face finished stilling. Verity did not flinch. That was the worst of it. A woman who flinched could be comforted. A woman who had trained herself not to flinch had been disappointed too often to expect comfort. Yes, she said. Very convenient. For someone. He rose, still holding the deed, and the chair whispered backward over the carpet. You expect me to believe that my estate passed into your control, that letters explaining it vanished, and that you entered this marriage without saying a word because you were waiting to see whether I would behave prettily. No, her answer came at once. I expected you to behave honorably. The blow landed cleanly because it was deserved. Alistair turned toward the windows, beyond the glass. Redmere Park lay under pale sunlight. Broad lawns rolling down to skeletal elms, the stables beyond, the roofs of tenant cottages barely visible past the lower fields. He had known every line of that view since boyhood. He had thought ownership meant knowledge. He had been wrong. You had this before our wedding, and you allowed me to marry you believing your portion would help repair the estate. My portion did help repair the estate. That is not an answer. It's the truest one I have. Her voice softened, but not with surrender. The settlement money paid urgent accounts. The deed protected the lands those accounts could not touch. Lady Elspeth feared Redmere would be broken apart before anyone in your family admitted how close it was to ruin. Alistair turned back. My family's ruin was not hers to manage. No, but she loved this place more faithfully than several men who inherited it. His gaze cut to hers. In another woman, the sentence might have sounded cruel. In Verity, it sounded like grief disciplined into accuracy. You speak boldly for someone who has carried this secret under my roof. Your roof, she repeated. For the first time that morning, pain entered her voice openly enough to be heard. That is the habit, isn't it? Your roof, your estate, your household, your name, even when I am expected to bear it, preserve it, and smile beneath it. Verity. No. She lifted one hand, not high, only enough to stop him. You asked why I said nothing. I will answer. Lady Elspeth told me that papers reveal what manners conceal. She said a man desperate enough to save his house might marry a woman and never see her at all. I did not want to believe that. I thought, if I came here as your wife, if I learned the household, if I took up the duties quietly, if I did not force gratitude from you, then perhaps one morning you would ask what I had brought besides money. The room seemed to narrow around her words. Alistair remembered their wedding breakfast in London, Verity seated beside the dowager with her gloved hands folded, answering every formal remark with composure. He remembered the journey to Sussex, her face turned toward the carriage window as Redmere first appeared between the trees. He had thought her silent from shyness. Now he wondered whether she had been waiting for a welcome that never came. And because I did not ask, he said slowly, you decided to punish me. Her eyes met his. If this were punishment, Your Grace, you would have learned it from a creditor, not from me. He could not answer. The distinction was too exact. Verity came around the length of the table, stopping well beyond the reach of his hand. The distance was proper. It felt unbearable. She tapped the second page of the deed packet, not touching him. The lands remain protected if the terms are honored. The tenants cannot be displaced for speculative sale without my consent. The mill lease cannot be transferred without review. The old park woods cannot be cut to satisfy unsecured debt. You know all of this by memory. I had reason to learn. And you did not think your husband had reason to know. I thought my husband had reason to ask why his wife arrived with an old writing case locked at every hour. The truth was so plain that it made him feel foolish. Worse than foolish, careless. I was told your godmother left you papers of sentimental value. By whom? He frowned. The answer rose, then stopped. Piers. It had been Piers at the club 3 days before the wedding, with that smooth, pitying tone. Lady Elspeth had filled the girl's head with keepsakes and moral importance, he had said. Nothing dangerous. Nothing requiring ducal attention. Alistair had been tired, cornered by debts, bruised by the knowledge that Redmere might fall under his care. He had accepted the explanation because it saved him effort. He hated himself for that first flicker of recognition. Verity saw it. She saw too much. Who told you? She asked. It does not matter yet. It matters if he lied. I said it doesn't matter yet. His voice hardened out of habit. Her face closed. The room became colder at once. Alistair drew a breath through his nose and forced the next words lower. I received no letters. I swear that to you. Something changed then, barely. Not trust, not forgiveness, but the rigid accusation in her eyes loosened at its edge. Then someone made certain of it. The letters may have been misdirected. 3 times. He had no answer that satisfied even himself. Verity looked toward the abandoned coffee service. Lady Elspeth believed Redmere was in danger from more than debt. She did not name every fear. She was too ill by then, and she had begun to trust no messenger. What did she fear? That someone close to Halverstone wanted the estate weak enough to sell in pieces. Alistair's first instinct was rejection. The second was memory, Piers urging speed, Piers advising silence, Piers handling correspondence while Alistair was in London with creditors. Piers always useful, always near. A knock sounded at the breakfast room door before he could speak. Both of them turned. The butler entered with visible reluctance and a silver salver in his hand. Upon it lay a single calling card. Forgive the interruption, Your Grace. Lord Piers Vellum has arrived and requests a private word. Verity went very still. Alistair looked from the card to the deed packet, and for the first time all morning, the danger in the room no longer seemed to stand between husband and wife. It stood outside the door, smiling politely and asking to be received. Lord Piers Vellum entered Redmere Park with the softness of a man who believed doors opened because he deserved them to. He did not hurry. His carriage wheels had scarcely ceased upon the gravel before the household seemed to rearrange itself around his arrival. Footmen straightening, maids disappearing, the butler recovering his professional calm. Verity watched from the breakfast room as Alistair held the calling card between 2 fingers and did not immediately speak. That hesitation told her more than any explanation might have done. Lord Piers was not merely a cousin who called too early. He was a habit, a man long allowed near locks, ledgers, and decisions. Alistair placed the card on the table, face upward beside the deed packet. He will wait in the drawing room, he said. No, Verity answered. Alistair looked at her. It was not anger yet. It was surprise sharpened by rank. No. If Lord Piers has come on estate business, and if that business concerns the paper presently lying between us, then I prefer he not be received in a room, where I must be summoned afterward like a witness. A brief silence followed. The butler remained by the door, his eyes lowered so perfectly that he seemed carved for discretion. Alistair's jaw tightened. In another moment, he might have refused her by instinct. Verity saw the refusal forming. She also saw him stop it. "Show Lord Piers here," Alistair said. The butler bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." When the door closed, Alistair gathered the deed packet, tied it loosely again with the ivory ribbon, and set it nearer to Verity than to himself. It was a small movement. Perhaps it meant nothing. Yet Verity felt it, as one felt the first uncertain warmth from a fire not yet trusted. "You need not speak unless you choose," he said. How generous! His mouth hardened, but he accepted the rebuke. "I mean that I do not intend to have you questioned in my breakfast room." He may try. Then he will learn the difference between a question and an insult. Before she could answer, the door opened. Lord Piers came in smiling. He was in his late 30s, fair-haired, well-dressed, and handsome in the manner of men who made a profession of appearing harmless. His morning coat sat flawlessly upon narrow shoulders. His gloves were pale, his cane polished, his expression arranged into concern, so elegant it might have been practiced before a mirror. "Alistair," he said warmly, then bowed toward Verity, with just enough depth to satisfy etiquette, and not enough to honor her. "Duchess, forgive this intrusion. I came the moment I heard." Verity felt Alistair's attention shift. "Heard what?" Piers glanced toward the deed packet. Not at Alistair first, at the packet, then back, too late, only that a difficulty had arisen with the southern lands. "Redmere has many loyal ears, as you know. Servants worry when their betters are troubled." "My servants do not report household matters to my cousins," Alistair said. Piers' smile held, but its polish thinned. "Naturally not. I meant only that the atmosphere of a great house speaks, and with creditors circling, one learns to be alert." He turned to Verity. "You must forgive us, Duchess. Estate affairs can be remarkably dull to those not bred to them." There it was, silk over a blade. Verity folded her hands before her. "On the contrary, Lord Piers, I have always found dull matters useful. Men reveal themselves when they believe women have stopped listening." Alistair's eyes moved to her, quick and unreadable. Piers gave a soft laugh. "Charming. Lady Elspeth's influence, I suspect. She always did enjoy filling young heads with notions of stewardship. Lady Elspeth taught me to read what I signed. A valuable habit, though one hopes not an anxious one." Piers looked again at the packet. "May I?" He reached out as though permission were a courtesy already granted. Verity's hand moved first. She laid her fingers on the deed packet. Piers stopped. For half a second, his smile vanished. It returned almost at once. "My dear Duchess, I only mean to spare His Grace unnecessary alarm. I have handled Halverstone estate matters for years." "So I understand." "Then you understand why papers touching Redmere should remain within the bloodline." The room cooled. Verity heard the phrase exactly as he intended it. Wife, but not blood, Duchess, but not trusted. Necessary, but foreign. Alistair stepped closer to the table. His voice was quiet. "Choose your next words carefully, Piers." Piers lifted both hands in graceful apology. "I mean no offense. Her Grace is fortunate, of course, to have entered a house of such history, but fortune can attract advisers, and advisers can mislead. There are solicitors who prey upon elderly ladies and impressionable young women." "Lady Elspeth was neither prey nor foolish," Verity said. "I didn't say she was." "You implied it. Duchess, I'm sure you can see that a woman newly married into a ducal family might not grasp the burden of old obligations." Alistair's expression changed. It did not soften. It became more dangerous because it became still. You will address my wife as Her Grace. Piers blinked once. Of course. And you will not ask to examine her papers again unless she invites you to do so. The words landed with the weight of command. Verity did not look at Alistair. She could not. Some vulnerable and inconvenient part of her had stirred at the phrase "my wife," and she resented it for stirring. Piers's gaze moved between them. Calculation passed behind his eyes, swift as a shadow crossing a mirror. I see, there has already been some misunderstanding. There has been a great deal of that, Verity said. Then let me repair what I can. Piers drew out a chair without being invited fully to sit, a breach small enough to deny and large enough to claim familiarity. Alistair did not sit. Piers noticed and remained standing. Before the wedding, Piers continued, there were rumors that Lady Elspeth had made certain arrangements. Keepsakes, old correspondence, sentimental protections, nothing uncommon. I advised Alistair not to trouble you with matters beyond immediate concern. Verity's eyes went to her husband. Alistair's face had hardened with recognition. You told me her papers were sentimental, he said, because that is what I believed. You also told me no correspondence required attention. If correspondence failed to reach you, that is hardly my fault. Verity spoke before Alistair could. What correspondence? Piers turned to her slowly. His smile became patient. I cannot recall the details. Yet you recall enough to defend yourself from an accusation no one had made aloud. The silence that followed was the first honest thing Lord Piers had brought into the room. Alistair saw it. Verity knew he did, because his hand closed once at his side, then opened again. Piers recovered with admirable speed. Her grace is quick, that is to be admired, but quickness can become suspicion, and suspicion in a new marriage is a regrettable seed. A seed grows best when someone has buried it, Verity said. Enough, Alistair said, but not to her. He crossed to the bell pull and rang once. The gesture was calm. Its meaning was not. When the butler appeared, Alistair did not take his eyes from Piers. Mr. Hargreaves, Lord Piers is no longer to have access to the estate room, the southern ledgers, the correspondence cabinet, or the household seal without my written instruction. Piers went pale beneath his careful colour. Alistair, surely you don't intend to embarrass yourself with theatrics. I intend to know which papers are mine to inspect, which are my wife's to protect, and which have been touched by hands that should not have touched them. You insult me? Not yet. The butler bowed, as if he had heard nothing remarkable. Yes, Your Grace. And send word to Mr. Carrow, the steward. He is to prepare the wage books and southern accounts for my review before dusk. Yes, Your Grace. When the door closed again, Piers's charm had become thinner, almost transparent. This is an unfortunate way to treat family. Family does not require unlocked cabinets to prove loyalty, Alistair said. You have been under strain, Piers replied, softening his voice. Creditors, gossip, a new marriage. No man thinks clearly when his estate is threatened. His gaze slid to Verity, and no lady should be burdened with matters that may make her position uncomfortable. My position was made uncomfortable long before you arrived, Verity said. Piers bowed his head. Then I hope comfort finds you soon, Your Grace. The title was correct. The tone was not. He took his leave with every outward courtesy, but as he passed the table, his eyes returned once more to the ivory ribbon. Not the deed. The ribbon. Verity watched him go, and a chill touched the back of her neck. Alistair remained still until the carriage wheels had faded from the drive. He knew, he said. He knew enough to fear what I possess, Verity answered. That is not the same as knowing all of it. Alistair looked at the deed packet. then at her hand resting over it. I should have stopped him sooner. She did not soften the truth for him. Yes, the answer struck him, but he accepted it. I will stop him now. For one moment, the room held a fragile truce. Neither of them dared name. Verity gathered the deed packet and returned it to the rosewood case. Her fingers paused on the ivory ribbon. She had tied it before breakfast with the knot facing left, as Lady Elspeth had always done. Now, beneath her thumb, the knot sat neatly to the right, a small change, a silent one. Someone had opened the case before she had brought it downstairs. Verity closed the lid slowly. Alistair noticed. "What is it?" he asked. She turned the key in the lock and felt the old brass bite shut. Someone touched this before Lord Piers ever entered the room. By 6 o'clock that evening, the secret had travelled faster than any carriage Verity had ever taken. It arrived in London ahead of them, settled itself beneath chandeliers, passed from gloved hand to gloved hand with the sherry, and waited in Dowager Duchess Octavia Merrow's drawing-room like an invited guest. Verity knew it the moment she crossed the threshold of Halverstone House in Mayfair. No one stared openly. That would have been vulgar. Instead, conversations softened by a fraction, fans lifted too quickly, and several ladies looked at her with the sharpened pity reserved for women, whose private wounds had become suitable dinner entertainment. Alistair stood at her side, dark and formal, his expression as controlled as the black silk of his waistcoat. He had spoken very little during the journey from Sussex. Once, somewhere between Redmere Park and the coaching inn, he had asked whether she wished to return home. Verity had looked at the passing hedgerows and answered that Redmere had not yet decided whether it was home. After that, silence had sat between them. Not empty, but crowded with everything, both refused to say. Now, beneath his mother's London roof, she felt the old brass key hidden in the pocket sewn inside her evening gown. The deed packet remained locked in her travelling case, upstairs under her maid's supervision, but the key stayed with Verity. She no longer trusted distance. Dowager Duchess Octavia received them beside the marble fireplace. She was a tall woman, with silver hair, a straight back, and eyes that had frightened half of London into good manners for 30 years. She kissed the air beside Verity's cheek, then held her a moment longer than etiquette required. "My dear," she said softly, "remember that people who whisper usually lack the courage to know anything properly. I shall try, Your Grace. Octavia tonight. If we are to survive my dinner table, we may as well do it as allies." Verity nearly smiled. It did not quite reach her lips, but Octavia seemed to value the attempt. Alistair bowed over his mother's hand. "You invited too many people." "I invited exactly the number required to discover who is careless with information." His eyes narrowed. "Mother, do not growl at me before the soup, Alistair. It spoils the appetite." She turned away to greet another guest, leaving Verity with a strange, brief warmth in her chest. It vanished when Lord Piers Vellum entered. He came late enough to be noticed and early enough to pretend he had not intended it. His evening dress was flawless. His smile was modest. He bowed first to the Dowager, then to Alistair, then to Verity with a deference so polished that only someone watching closely would see the insult beneath it. "Your Grace," he said to her, "I hope London has not fatigued you after such an eventful morning." Verity felt Alistair shift beside her. She answered before he could. "Not at all, Lord Piers. I find London most educational. Then tonight should serve admirably." His gaze flicked toward the gathered guests. "Everyone here knows something." "How fortunate," Verity said. Perhaps one of them will know the truth. Piers's smile held. Truth is often a matter of perspective. No, Alistair said quietly, it isn't. Piers inclined his head, but the glance he gave Verity held a warning. Dinner was announced before any further exchange could sharpen. The dining room was brilliant with candlelight and gold-rimmed china, yet Verity felt as if she were entering a court of judgment. The dowager had placed her halfway down the table, opposite Lady Marchvale, a widow known for saying cruel things in a voice soft enough to be mistaken for refinement. Alistair sat several places away, as rank and custom demanded. Piers was positioned near enough to influence the conversation and far enough to deny responsibility for it. For the first course, the talk remained harmless. There was opera, weather, a new exhibition, the Princess of Wales's gown, and a tedious dispute over whether a certain baronet's daughter had been too forward at a recent assembly. Verity answered when addressed and listened when not. She had long ago learned that silence, properly used, made other people reveal the shape of their malice. By the fish course, Piers began. One must admire any family able to preserve an ancestral seat in these difficult times, he said, addressing the table rather than any single person. Land has become a demanding mistress. Old houses consume fortunes and offer only honour in return. Lord Ainsworth laughed. Honour is a costly meal, Vellum. My steward tells me so weekly. Indeed, Piers replied. Some men marry for beauty, some for alliance, and some, I suppose, for rescue. The table gave a small, appreciative murmur. It was the kind of remark that seemed general until every eye avoided the same woman. Verity lifted her wine-glass, but did not drink. Alistair's hand had gone still around his fork. Lady Marchvale tilted her head. Rescue is a charming word. It sounds so much better than purchase. A few fans trembled. Someone coughed. The dowager's expression became serene in the manner of a drawn blade. Verity set down her glass. She could have pretended not to understand. That was what society expected of women under insult. Smile, lower the eyes, let the wound pass through the room without staining the carpet. But she had stood that morning before the man who married her for an estate, and she had survived the truth. She would not be destroyed by a widow with pearls. I suppose that depends on what one imagines was purchased, Verity said. Lady Marchvale blinked, delighted to have drawn blood and uncertain why the prey had stepped closer. My dear Duchess, I meant nothing particular. Of course not. Particularity requires courage. The table fell quiet. Across the candles, Alistair looked directly at Verity. His face did not change, but something fierce entered his eyes. Piers leaned back a little, watching. Lady Marchvale gave a small laugh. How spirited! I had not expected it. Few people expect spirit in a woman they have decided to pity. The dowager reached for her glass with magnificent calm, a useful observation. Piers entered smoothly. Her Grace must forgive us. Society is clumsy when surprised. A young lady rises from modest expectations to one of the highest stations in England, and naturally curiosity follows. Curiosity is not the same as accusation, Verity said. No one accuses you, Lady Marchvale replied. We merely wonder whether old papers can now purchase a coronet as readily as old blood once did. There it was, plain enough that even politeness could not cover it. Verity felt the words strike, not because she had not expected them, but because Alistair had once given the room permission to think them. At breakfast, he had named her a bargain. By dinner, London had dressed the wound in diamonds and served it with wine. Alistair rose. The movement was quiet. It silenced the table more completely than any shout could have done. "Lady Marchvale," he said, "you are a guest in my mother's house, so I will assume your manners have only briefly deserted you." Colour climbed the lady's throat. "Your Grace, I only meant. You meant to discuss my wife as though she were a transaction. You will not do so again." No one moved. Even Piers did not smile. Verity kept her eyes on the candle flame before her plate. Because if she looked at Alistair too quickly, she feared her face would reveal how sharply his defense had touched her. It was not enough. It did not heal breakfast. It did not answer the missing letters. But it stood between her and the room, and for one unsteady second, she was not alone beneath all those eyes. Lady Marchvale lowered her gaze. "I apologize, Your Grace." Alistair did not sit. "Not to me." The words travelled the length of the table. Lady Marchvale turned toward Verity. Her smile had vanished. "I apologize, Duchess." Verity inclined her head. Accepted. She did not say forgiven. The distinction mattered. Dinner resumed, but its elegance had cracked. Silver touched china too carefully. Conversation returned in fragments and never recovered its ease when the ladies withdrew after the final course. Verity stepped into the corridor before anyone could close around her with false sympathy. Alistair followed within moments, ignoring the gentleman who had begun to rise for port. Verity. She stopped beneath a gilt mirror. Her reflection looked pale, composed, and older than it had that morning. "You should return to your guests. They can survive without me." "Can they? You married to save an estate. I would hate for the port to endanger it." Pain crossed his face before he masked it. "I deserved that. Yes." He came no closer. The restraint was deliberate, and she noticed it. His hand lifted a little, then lowered at his side, as though he had remembered too late that comfort was not a right he had earned. "I did not know they had heard. Someone ensured they did. I will find out who. And when you do, will you defend my title again, or my character?" The question struck him silent. Verity turned to him fully then. Candlelight caught the line of his cheek, the severe set of his mouth. The first visible fracture in the pride that had once seemed immovable. "Do not defend my title while doubting my character," she said. "I cannot bear gratitude that still suspects me." Alistair's voice lowered. "I do not know what I believe yet." "Then say nothing tender until you do." She left him there before he could answer. At the end of the corridor, the dowager stood half in shadow, waiting, as if she had heard enough and guessed the rest. Verity passed into the ladies' withdrawing room, where whispers died upon her entrance. Behind her, Octavia approached her son. Her voice was low, but the corridor carried it. If Piers wished to protect this family, he would have silenced gossip before it reached my table. Alistair said nothing. The dowager's next words were colder than the marble underfoot. "Your cousin is not protecting the estate, Alistair. He is protecting himself." By the next morning, Verity understood that shame could be a poor map, but it could still point toward danger. She woke in Halverstone House with Lady Marchville's apology still cold in her memory, and the dowager's warning about Lord Piers burning more brightly than any candle. She did not wait for Alistair to summon explanations, nor for society to decide which version of her would be most amusing over tea. After breakfast taken alone in her sitting room, she dressed in dark blue walking silk, pinned her veil with steady hands, and sent for Mrs. Vale, the widowed companion who had served Lady Elspeth during her last illness and now attended Verity whenever propriety required another pair of respectable eyes. "Lincoln's Inn, Your Grace," Mrs. Vale asked, accepting the card Verity gave her. Yes, Mr. Fenwick received 3 letters before my wedding. I intend to learn whether he also sent 3. Mrs. Vale's expression tightened, not with surprise, but with the grave satisfaction of a woman who had suspected men of incompetence long before being offered proof. Lady Elspeth always, said Mr. Fenwick, kept copies of everything except compliments. Then, today I shall value his habits. The carriage waiting outside was not the modest hired vehicle Verity had ordered. It was Alistair's town carriage, black, polished, and unmistakable, with a sober coachman and a groom mounted behind. Verity paused on the steps. The butler stood near the door with practiced innocence. His Grace's instruction? She asked. His Grace requested that the carriage be placed at your Grace's disposal whenever you chose to go out. Requested. Ordered, your Grace. It was not tenderness. It was protection trying to disguise itself as household management. Verity should have disliked it. She did dislike the presumption. Yet as she entered the carriage with Mrs. Vale beside her and the groom falling into place behind, she could not deny that London looked less hostile through a ducal crest and a closed door. Mr. Fenwick's office stood in a narrow court, where soot had darkened the stone, and clerks moved like purposeful shadows between doors. The solicitor was a thin, elderly gentleman with white brows, precise cuffs, and an expression that suggested careless speech caused him physical pain. He bowed with genuine respect when Verity entered. Your Grace, Mrs. Vale, I had hoped you would come. Verity removed her gloves slowly. Then you expected something to go wrong. I feared it. There is a difference. There is indeed. Mr. Fenwick unlocked a cabinet behind his desk and withdrew a narrow folio tied with green tape. Lady Elspeth instructed me to preserve copies of all correspondence concerning Redmere Park and its southern encumbrances. She was most particular. She was dying, Verity said. Dying people are often particular because the living have failed them. Mr. Fenwick bowed his head. A fair rebuke. He laid 3 copied letters before her. The first bore his own seal. The second came from Verity's marriage solicitor. The third was in Lady Elspeth's hand, its lines grown uneven but still forceful. Each was addressed to Alistair Merrow, Duke of Halverstone. Each was dated before the wedding. Each explained enough that no man receiving them could have honestly called Verity merely a portion, a rescue, or a convenient bride. Verity looked at the dates, one after another, and felt no triumph. Truth, when delayed too long, did not arrive clean. It dragged pain behind it. Were they delivered? She asked. Mr. Fenwick turned a ledger toward her. According to the receipt returned to this office, yes. Verity read the entry. The letters had been accepted at Halverstone House, in London, by an authorized household hand. Beside the notation appeared a pressed seal mark, copied in ink with Fenwick's careful note. The Halverstone household seal, she said. Yes, your Grace, who could use it? In ordinary circumstances, the Duke, his secretary, the butler under instruction, or a trusted family representative granted access to correspondence. Mrs. Vale's mouth thinned. Lord Piers was forever presenting himself as trusted. Mr. Fenwick did not answer, which was answer enough. Verity touched the third letter, the one Lady Elspeth had written. What did she fear? The solicitor removed his spectacles, polished them, and replaced them. It gave him time, but not escape. She feared that the southern lands were being made to appear less valuable than they are. She believed a speculative buyer had shown interest through an intermediary, a man named Mr. Cresswell Dane. Verity knew the name from Alistair's account book, seen only once across his desk. Not a gentleman, not county society, a moneyed man who bought distress at a discount. and called it enterprise, connected to Lord Piers. Lady Elspeth suspected so. Could she prove it? Not before her illness overtook her. The room seemed to lose warmth. Verity looked at the copied letters again and saw, beneath the ink, the shape of her godmother's final urgency. Why not warn Alistair more directly? She tried. Her last note said she had come to trust no messenger near Halverstone matters. Mr. Fenwick hesitated. She also believed. His Grace was too proud to accept rescue unless he first understood the danger. A faint, bitter softness touched Verity's mouth. He understood the rescue. He misunderstood the rescuer. Mr. Fenwick looked pained. Your Grace, I advised full disclosure before the ceremony. And Lady Elspeth refused. She said, a man who does not read the woman before him will not be saved by reading papers about her. Verity closed her eyes for one breath. Lady Elspeth, stern even from the grave, I need the copies. They are prepared. He slid a sealed packet toward her. And one more matter. The southern lands include 3 cottages near Redmere village whose tenancies are protected under Lady Elspeth's terms. One widow, Mrs. Annis Bell, has already written twice asking whether she is to be removed by spring. Verity's eyes opened. Removed? By whom? She was told the land might be cleared for sale. No such order came from me. I did not believe it had. Verity rose. The decision formed before fear could argue. Mrs. Vale, we are going to Sussex. Mrs. Vale looked at the winter light beyond the window. It is more than 40 miles, Your Grace. Then we should begin. Mr. Fenwick stood. May I suggest informing His Grace? You may suggest it. Verity took the sealed packet, but I will not ask permission to reassure a woman frightened in my name. By late afternoon, after hours of jolting roads, grey fields, and Mrs. Vale's determined silence, the carriage turned from the main road toward the poorer edge of Redmere village. Verity had not returned to the great house first. If Alistair wished to know where she had gone, he had provided the carriage and the groom. He could ask them. Mrs. Annis Bell's cottage stood near a low stone wall, its thatch mended in uneven patches, its small garden sleeping under frost. Smoke rose thinly from the chimney. A boy of perhaps 10 opened the door and stared at the ducal carriage as if judgment had arrived on wheels. Verity removed her veil before stepping down. A frightened person should see the face of the woman addressing her. Mrs. Bell came to the threshold wiping flour from her hands. Her widow's cap, neat but worn, when she recognized the crest on the carriage, she paled. Your Grace, Mrs. Bell, Verity said gently. May I speak with you? The widow bobbed a curtsy and stood aside. The cottage was clean, narrow, and warmed by a small fire, a mended chair, a scrubbed table, a shelf of chipped plates, and 2 children standing close together told Verity more about the estate than ledgers had. This was what men gambled when they spoke of land. Not acres, lives. I have come about the notice you received, Verity said. Mrs. Bell looked down. I don't mean to make trouble, Your Grace, Mr. Vellam's man said the new Duchess had rights over the cottage lands and that old arrangements might not hold. Verity's fingers tightened around her reticule. Mr. Vellam's man said that. Not Mr. Vellam himself, ma'am. A clerk, I think. He said papers were changing. They are not changing in a way that will remove you. Mrs. Bell's eyes filled, but she did not let tears fall. Pride lived in small cottages too. My husband was born here. He died thinking the children would have the roof if I kept the rent. Then he did not die mistaken. Verity drew one of Mr. Fenwick's prepared extracts from her reticule. It was not the full deed, but a statement plain enough to comfort. Your tenancy is protected. No one is to threaten you in my name. If anyone does, you will send word to me directly." The widow stared at the paper as if it were bread. Why would they say such a thing? Verity thought of Piers's smile, of Lady Marchvale's insult, of Alistair's wounded pride, of 3 letters stopped before they reached the man who should have read them. "Because fear makes people obedient," she said, "and someone has mistaken you for someone who can be frightened into silence." Mrs. Bell straightened a little. "I can be frightened, Your Grace, but I don't like being lied to." For the first time that day, Verity smiled fully. "Nor do I." When she left the cottage, dusk had gathered over Redmere's fields. The groom stepped forward with a folded note he had received from a rider at the village road. "From His Grace, Your Grace." Verity opened it beneath the fading light. The message was brief, written in Alistair's hard, controlled hand. "Return when you are ready. The carriage and men are yours until you do." She read it twice. It was not an apology. It was not trust, but it was not command. Behind her, Mrs. Bell stood in the cottage doorway, holding the paper that protected her home. Ahead, Redmere Park waited under a darkening sky, grand, wounded, and full of locked rooms. Verity folded Alistair's note and placed it beside Mr. Fenwick's packet. Somewhere inside that great house, the household seal had been used to swallow 3 letters. Now she had proof they had existed. And proof, at last, that the danger had learned to speak in her name. Alistair was waiting in the library when Verity returned to Redmere Park. But he had not chosen the chair behind the great desk. That was the first thing she noticed. He stood instead near the long table where estate ledgers had been arranged in sober rows, their cracked leather covers opened beneath lamplight like old wounds. Beyond the windows, Sussex had gone dark. The house smelled faintly of rain, coal smoke, and paper kept too long in locked rooms. Verity paused on the threshold with Mrs. Vale behind her and Mr. Fenwick's packet in her hand. Alistair turned at once. He did not ask where she had been. He must already have known. His carriage had carried her. His groom had watched the road. His note had followed her into the village without demanding her return. "Mrs. Vale," he said, bowing slightly. "Thank you for attending Her Grace." The companion measured him with calm disapproval. "It was my privilege, Your Grace." Verity almost smiled. Mrs. Vale made privilege sound like a warning. When the older woman withdrew, closing the door behind her, Verity crossed the room and placed the sealed packet on the table. Mr. Fenwick kept copies. Alistair looked at it, then at her face. "I know. You know. A messenger from his office reached me an hour before you did. Only a summary, not the papers." His voice was low. 3 letters, all delivered, all signed for under the household seal. Verity removed her gloves finger by finger. "Then we are no longer wondering whether the letters existed. No, only who buried them." He looked toward the open ledgers, and what else was buried? There was something in his tone that stopped her from answering quickly. It was not the brittle anger of breakfast or the polished authority he had used against Lord Piers. It was quieter, more dangerous to himself. Verity came nearer. On the table lay wage books, rent rolls, steward's memoranda, and a stack of household accounts tied with black tape. Several entries had been marked in Alistair's hand. She recognized the neat severity of his writing. "You began without me," she said. "I began because I was ashamed to wait." The honesty unsettled her more than a defense would have done. Alistair drew one ledger toward them and turned it so she could read. "Estate wages were delayed twice last quarter. Stable hands, dairy women, 2 gardeners, 3 housemaids, and the carpenter's apprentice. The steward recorded the arrears as settled. Verity looked at the page. Her own name did not appear, but she knew the figures. By you. The room held still. Yes. From your private account. Yes. And you did not tell me. She lifted her eyes. Would you have thanked me? He flinched. It was small, but real. No, she had expected evasion. The plain answer struck harder. Alistair rested both hands on the table, not leaning into power now, but as if the polished wood were the only thing keeping him upright. I would have hated needing it. I would have called it interference. I would have found some way to make your decency sound like an accusation. Verity had no wish to pity him. Pity was too simple, but she felt the first unwelcome ache of seeing a proud man look honestly at his own meanness. Then you understand why I was silent. I understand why you distrusted me. Those are not the same. They are close enough to shame me. He turned another page. You paid wages. You sent coal to 2 cottages. You instructed the housekeeper not to dismiss the laundry girls when the London accounts ran short. You visited Mrs. Bell today because someone threatened her tenancy in your name. If this is an inventory of my offences, I should like to sit down. It is not. His voice roughened. It is an inventory of my neglect. The words fell between them and did not move. Verity sat because her legs had grown tired from the journey, from the cottage, from too many rooms where she had been required to stand straight while men discovered what she had already known. Alistair did not sit until she had settled. The echo of that old etiquette returned from breakfast, changed now by the weight of awareness. Why did you not shame me sooner? He asked, publicly or privately. Either. She looked toward the fire. Because I did not want a marriage built on your humiliation any more than I wanted one built on my usefulness. I humiliated you. Yes. No ornament, no cruelty, just truth. He accepted it as if each simple word cost him. When I said what I did at breakfast, I believed I was naming the bargain honestly. You were naming me carelessly. His hand closed around the edge of the ledger. Yes. Verity looked back at him then. The lamplight made him seem less untouchable, less like the Duke in portraits, and more like a man who had inherited too many locked doors. Kindness should not need to be proven like a debt, she said. I did not pay the wages to trap you into gratitude. I paid them because people had earned their bread. I protected Mrs. Bell because a widow should not have to tremble every time gentlemen misplace money. I know. Do you? He met her eyes. I am beginning to. That answer, imperfect and unfinished, was the first one she believed. Alistair reached for a paper at his right. I have sent for Mr. Carrow, but until he arrives, I have removed Lord Piers from all immediate estate access. The correspondence cabinet has been sealed. The household seal is now locked in my own strongbox. Mr. Hargreaves will provide a written record of every person who has requested it in the last 6 months. Will Mr. Hargreaves tell the truth? He will if I ask the right questions. And if the right answer implicates a man your family has trusted for years. Alistair looked down. Then I will have trusted a liar. That is not the worst thing a person can discover. What is? That he trusted the liar because the lie was convenient. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the coldness had not returned. I deserve that as well. I am not trying to wound you. No, that is why it wounds. The fire shifted softly. Verity lowered her gaze to the account book. There, in stark columns, were the little sums that had kept dignity intact in kitchens, stables, cottages, and washrooms. Money could look bloodless on a page. She knew better now. Every figure belonged to a face. Alistair followed her glance. I will repay your account. That is not the point. It is one point. If You repay me and learn nothing. Then the estate has purchased silence again. I am learning. The words came quickly, almost too quickly. He heard it himself and stopped. Then he spoke more slowly. I want to learn. Verity did not answer. Trust, once made cautious, did not run merely because called. He moved to the small side table where a tray had been left untouched. Ink, sand, sealing wax, and a folded square of linen lay near the lamp. When he returned, she realized she had smeared ink across 2 fingers while handling Mr. Fenwick's copies. She had not noticed. Alistair held out the linen handkerchief. The gesture was simple. It should not have mattered. It did. May I? He asked. Not assumed, asked. Verity looked at his hand, then at his face. You may give it to me. Something like disappointment crossed his features, but he nodded and placed the handkerchief in her palm. Of course. That, of course, did more than a touch might have done. It obeyed the boundary without sulking at it. Verity wiped the ink from her fingers while he turned away to give her the privacy of an insignificant thing. She hated how much that courtesy eased her. Alistair, he looked back. It was the first time she had spoken his name that evening. His expression altered before he could hide it. Yes, Mrs. Bell said, a clerk came in Lord Piers's interest, not Piers himself. A clerk can be found, only if he is not warned first. Alistair's gaze sharpened. Duke and investigator returned, but now the force did not feel aimed at her. Then we do not warn him. He crossed to the desk and wrote 2 brief notes, one to Mr. Carow, and one to a London agent he trusted more than he wished to admit he trusted anyone. He sanded the ink, folded the papers, and sealed them not with the household seal, but with his personal signet. Verity noticed. So did he. Until I know who touched the seal, I will not use it. Good. That single word seemed to steady him more than praise would have done. A knock came at the library door. Mr. Hargreaves entered, pale beneath his professional composure. Forgive me, Your Grace. A rider has come from Redmere village. Alistair took the folded notice. He read it once. His face hardened. What is it? Verity asked. He handed it to her without hesitation. Across the top, in a bold printed hand, stood words that made the library shrink around her. By order of Her Grace, the Duchess of Halverstone, rents upon the southern cottages are to be reviewed and raised before Lady Day. Failure of compliance may result in removal. Verity felt the blood leave her face. I gave no such order. I know. This time Alistair said it at once. No pause, no question, no convenient suspicion. He turned to the butler, his voice controlled enough to frighten. Send to the stables. We leave for the village at first light. Then he looked at Verity, not past her, not over her, but to her. If they have taught my tenants to fear you, we will make certain they hear the truth from you first. Verity held the forged notice in both hands. Its lie was cruel. His answer was not. For the first time since breakfast, she felt the danger ahead of them, and did not feel entirely alone facing it. By first light, Redmere village had already read the lie. It had been nailed to the parish gate, pasted against the mill door, tucked beneath cottage latches, and carried in anxious whispers from hearth to hearth. Before the Duke's carriage ever appeared on the frost-hard road, Verity saw the first notice from the carriage window, a square of pale paper shivering against the churchyard wall. Her name stood at the top in dark print, larger than mercy. By order of Her Grace, the Duchess of Halverstone. She felt the words before she read the rest. They struck, as if some stranger had taken her hand and used it to wound people who had never harmed her. Alistair sat opposite, dressed for country business in a dark coat and riding boots, his face drawn with the controlled fury of a man who had slept little and forgiven nothing. Mrs. Vale sat beside Verity, silent as judgment. No one spoke until the carriage slowed near the church. A cluster of villagers had gathered beneath the bare yews, not loudly, not with rebellion, but with the frightened stiffness of people who had learned that power could alter their lives without looking them in the face. Mrs. Annis Bell stood near the front, one hand on her son's shoulder. The boy stared at Verity as if he no longer knew whether yesterday's comfort had been kindness or theatre. That hurt more than the printed notice. Alistair leaned forward. "I will speak first." Verity turned to him. No, his eyes met hers. For one dangerous second, the old Duke looked ready to command. Then he remembered the library, the forged notice, and the promise he had made without words. His jaw tightened, but he nodded once. "Then I stand beside you." "Not in front of me, beside you," he said. In the carriage, with frost silvering the glass and the village waiting outside, the correction mattered. Verity stepped down before the groom could fully lower his hand. The cold bit through her gloves. Every face turned toward her. There were caps in men's hands, shawls pulled tight, children half hidden behind skirts. No one bowed deeply. Fear had made etiquette uncertain. The vicar, Mr. Lydgate, came forward with a strained expression. "Your Grace, I had hoped to prevent alarm before you arrived, but the notices were found before dawn." "How many?" Verity asked. "A dozen at least." "Bring one to me, please." A young farmer stepped forward and held out a paper. He would not meet her eyes. Verity took it and read aloud. Not because she needed the words, but because lies lost some power when forced into the open. Rents upon the southern cottages are to be reviewed and raised before Lady Day. Failure of compliance may result in removal. Her voice carried across the churchyard. The villagers shifted. Someone muttered that a widow could not pay more. Someone else hushed him. Verity lowered the notice. "This order did not come from me. Silence. Not belief yet. Only listening, Mrs." Bell's fingers tightened on her son's coat. "Your Grace, a man came 2 days ago. He said papers had changed. He said the cottages belonged to the Duchess now, and a Duchess from London wouldn't understand old arrangements." "I am not from London," Verity said, "and I understand a promise." A murmur moved through the group. Alistair stood 3 feet to her right, close enough for support, far enough not to claim her voice. Verity was aware of him in the way one was aware of a fire behind glass. Contained, present, waiting. "No tenant on the southern lands will be removed because of this notice," she continued. "No widow will lose her roof because someone has printed my name without my consent. No rent will be raised by false paper nailed to a church wall before dawn." An old man near the gate lifted his head. "Begging your Grace's pardon, but papers have power." "They do," Verity said. "That is why wicked men like to hide behind them." The words landed harder than she had expected. Mr. Lydgate looked at her with sudden attention. So did Alistair. From the road came the sound of another carriage. Every head turned. Lord Piers Vellum arrived in an open landau, as if summoned by conscience, though Verity suspected conscience had never driven him anywhere. He stepped down with elegant concern, a fur-collared coat over his shoulders and his cane in hand. Behind him stood a narrow-faced clerk Verity did not recognize. The clerk looked at the ground too quickly. "What a distressing scene," Piers said, moving through the churchyard with careful regret. "Alistair, Duchess, I came the moment word reached me." "Word reaches you with remarkable speed," Verity said. Piers inclined his head. "Estate unrest concerns us all. These families have lived under Halverstone protection for generations." They are understandably troubled by sudden changes in authority. The villagers listened. That was his gift. He could make poison sound like sympathy. There has been no change in protection, Verity said, only in who has been honest about it. Piers gave her a sorrowful look. My dear Duchess, I admire your spirit, but rural tenancies are delicate. A legal right may exist on paper while still frightening those affected by it. Did your clerk frighten Mrs. Bell? The narrow-faced man behind him went rigid. Piers did not look back. I employ several clerks. This one, Verity asked. The villagers turned toward the man. The clerk swallowed. Piers smiled faintly. It would be improper to interrogate a servant of business before tenants, but proper to let tenants believe I ordered their removal. Piers' smile thinned. No one said removal was certain, only possible. You must see how it appears. A young duchess arrives with old papers, unsettles arrangements, pays wages privately, and now speaks of promises as though affection can govern land. The sentence was beautifully made. It was also meant to destroy her. Verity felt the village pull back by inches. Poor people could admire kindness, but they feared unpredictability more. Piers knew that. He painted her not as cruel, but as dangerous, because she was sentimental. Alistair moved. Verity did not look at him, but she lifted one gloved hand slightly. He stopped. Trust, in that moment, was not a declaration. It was obedience to her silence. Verity faced the villagers. Lord Piers is correct about one thing. Affection alone cannot govern land. Neither can pride. Neither can fear. Land is governed by obligations, and obligations must be kept by those with enough power to break them. She held up the notice. This is not obligation. This is cowardice in ink. A low murmur passed through the churchyard. Mrs. Bell's son stepped from behind his mother. Then we don't have to leave. The small question cut through every elegant weapon Piers had brought. Verity lowered herself enough to meet the child's eyes without making a display of it. No, you don't have to leave because of this paper. His mother pressed a hand over her mouth. Verity rose. Mr. Lydgate, will you witness my words? The vicar straightened. I will, your grace. Then hear them plainly. No notice affecting Redmere tenancies is valid unless confirmed by my hand, His Grace's hand, or Mr. Carow, the steward, in proper form. Any man who carries threats in my name, without that authority, carries a lie. Alistair stepped forward then, not before her, but beside her, his voice carried with ducal weight across the frozen grass. The Duchess speaks with my full authority. The churchyard went utterly still. Piers's face lost its warmth. Alistair continued, each word measured. These notices are false. They are withdrawn. Any person who posted them, ordered them, or profited from the fear they caused will answer to me. The villagers bowed then, not deeply, not theatrically, but with the relief of people who had been given ground beneath their feet. Verity felt the shift and did not mistake it for victory. Trust damaged in a night would not be repaired in a minute. Still, Mrs. Bell looked at her now without doubt, and that was enough to keep Verity standing. Piers gave a soft laugh that reached no one, a stirring performance. I hope generosity does not become expensive. Alistair turned his head. You have mistaken restraint for permission, Piers, and you have mistaken a wife's sentiment for policy. No, Alistair said. I have mistaken her for less than she is once already. I don't intend to repeat the error for your comfort. The words moved through Verity before she could defend herself against them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition, public and unmistakable. Piers bowed with icy grace. Then, I wish your grace's joy of the consequences. He returned to his carriage. His clerk followed, pale and silent. Verity watched the landau roll away toward the London road instead of back toward the estate. That direction mattered. Alistair noticed it too. "He is not retreating," Verity said quietly. "No," Alistair answered. "He is reporting." By evening, they learned to whom. A copy of a London scandal sheet arrived at Redmere Park just as lamps were being lit in the entrance hall. The paper had been rushed from town by a rider who expected payment for urgency. Mr. Hargreaves brought it to the library with the expression of a man carrying something unclean. Alistair took it, read the headline, and went still. Verity knew before he handed it to her that the churchyard had not ended the attack. It had only given it a better stage. Across the top of the page, in ink meant for breakfast tables across London, stood the words, "The deed Duchess rules Halverstone." Beneath it, the column claimed that the Duke of Halverstone had surrendered estate authority to a wife, whose mysterious papers now frightened tenants and old family advisers alike. Verity read to the final line without sitting down. Alistair watched her face, and this time he did not ask whether she was hurt. Of course she was hurt. The question now was what the hurt would become. She folded the paper once, very neatly. "They have moved from the village to London." Alistair's eyes were cold, but not toward her. "Then we answer in both places." Verity looked toward the locked case where the deed rested, then back to the scandal sheet in her hand. "No," she said. "First we find out who taught them exactly what to print." By noon the next day, the scandal had acquired manners. It arrived not as shouting, not as thrown stones, not as village panic beneath the churchyard yews, but as cream envelopes and folded cards delivered by footmen who would not meet Verity's eyes. One hostess regretted that her dinner table was already full. Another remembered an invalid aunt in Bath. A third wrote that, given the unfortunate public confusion surrounding Redmere, perhaps the Duchess of Halverstone might prefer a quieter week. The letters were placed upon the small table in Verity's morning room at Redmere Park, each one more polite than the last, each one withdrawing a welcome without admitting cowardice. Verity read them in order. She did not tear them. She did not laugh. She only arranged them by handwriting, because composure had become the last territory no one could seize without her consent. Mrs. Vale stood near the window, her expression severe enough to curdle milk. "London has always mistaken cruelty for hygiene," she said. "It likes to wash its hands of a woman before asking whether she is wounded." Verity set down the final note. "They are not washing their hands of me. They are waiting to see whether Alistair will." The name sat between them. It had grown more dangerous since the churchyard. Not tender, not safe, but no longer distant enough to be harmless. He had stood beside her before the tenants. He had said he would not mistake her again. He had looked at her as if her courage had become evidence against his former blindness. That memory should have steadied her. Instead, it made the pile of withdrawn invitations hurt more. Hope, she was discovering, made humiliation sharper. A knock came. Mr. Hargreaves entered with another card on a salver, and by the careful blankness of his face, Verity knew before she looked. Lord Piers Vellum had come again. This time, he had not come alone. 10 minutes later, from the upper gallery, Verity watched 3 gentlemen enter the library below. Piers, Sir Edmund Rakeley of the County Bank, and Mr. Fallow, a grey little man whose firm held one of the older estate notes. They removed their hats with the solemn importance of men who called anxiety prudence when it belonged to them. Alistair received them behind closed doors. Verity was not invited. That was the first warning. The second came when the meeting lasted more than an hour. The third came when the bell rang and a footman was sent to ask whether Her Grace would join His Grace in the library. Mrs. Vale reached for her shawl. Verity stopped her gently. "No, not yet. Your Grace, if I need a witness, I shall call for one. If I need courage, I have brought enough." The library smelled of paper, lamp oil, and male discomfort. Piers stood by the mantel with his hands folded over his cane, his face grave with counterfeit regret. Sir Edmund and Mr. Fallow hovered near the long table, where estate maps lay open beside the wage books and correspondence copies. Alistair stood at the window. He turned when Verity entered, and she saw at once that something had gone wrong inside him, not with the evidence, with his fear. "You sent for me," she said. "I asked you to come," he replied. "There is a difference." Piers sighed softly. "A touching distinction, though perhaps not the most urgent one." Alistair's eyes sharpened. "You will allow me to speak to my wife?" "Of course," Piers bowed. "Her Grace is, after all, central to the difficulty." Verity looked at him. "I had thought the forged notices were central." "The public rarely understands forgery before it understands appearance." Sir Edmund cleared his throat. "Your Grace, no one here questions Her Grace's intentions." "Then why are you here?" Verity asked. The banker glanced at Alistair, then at the carpet. "The scandal sheet has disturbed confidence," Mr. Fallow added. "The county families are anxious. Creditors dislike uncertainty. Tenants dislike uncertainty. Old retainers dislike uncertainty. It would ease matters if the deed were placed temporarily in neutral custody while its terms are examined." The words reached her with perfect clarity. Neutral custody. Examined. Temporarily. The kind of language that sounded clean because it had been scrubbed of feeling. Verity turned to Alistair. "Is this your request?" He did not answer quickly enough. The delay told her everything. "Verity," he said at last, "listen to me. I am. The estate is under scrutiny. London is watching. The village is unsettled. If the deed remains solely in your possession, Piers and men like him will continue to claim that I have surrendered Redmere into private control. It is in private control. Mine. Lawfully. I know. Do you?" His jaw tightened. "Yes." Piers stepped in with the gentleness of a blade sliding between ribs. "My dear Duchess, no one asks you to relinquish what is yours, only to permit a respectable solicitor, one acceptable to both parties, to hold the deed until suspicion is quieted." "Suspicion does not quiet when fed," Verity said. "It grows teeth. Unless there is nothing to fear." She looked back to Alistair. "Do you believe I forged it?" His face changed. "No." "Do you believe I threatened the tenants?" "No." "Do you believe I leaked this scandal to make myself powerful?" "No." "Then what are you asking me to prove?" Silence took the room. Sir Edmund studied the map with new devotion. Mr. Fallow found his cuffs fascinating. Piers watched Alistair with the patient hunger of a man waiting for another man to fail in public. Alistair saw it too. Verity knew he did. But fear had him by the throat, and pride was teaching him to call it duty. "I am asking you," Alistair said carefully, "to help me stabilize the estate." The words were not cruel. That made them worse. Cruelty she could resist with anger. This was almost reasonable, almost necessary, almost the old wound wearing a better coat. "No," she said. Alistair went still. "No, no." She touched the brass key inside her sleeve, not to display it, but to remind herself that she had carried more than paper through this marriage. "You may have the deed examined. You may have copies reviewed. You may summon Mr. Fenwick. You may question every seal, every witness, every date. But you may not take the one thing I possess, because society has found my possession unattractive. That is not what I am doing. It is exactly what you are doing. You are asking me to stand before the world and say, yes, I am innocent, but I understand why you distrust me enough to remove my proof. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. You may have the deed examined. You may not have my dignity held in escrow. The phrase struck like glass breaking in a quiet room. Alistair looked as though she had slapped him, though she had not moved. Piers lowered his gaze, but not before Verity saw satisfaction flicker there. That flicker steadied her more than comfort could have done. It confirmed the trap. Your Grace, Sir Edmund said nervously, perhaps a compromise. This is not a negotiation over tea service, Verity said. It is my name. Alistair stepped toward her. Verity, please. The word please should have been a bridge. It became a door closing, because it arrived too late and asked for the wrong sacrifice. She looked at him fully, the man who had begun to see her, then looked away when others demanded certainty from him. I thought, at the churchyard, that you had decided to stand beside me. I did. No. You stood beside me when the villagers watched. Today, when creditors watched, you asked me to step back from myself. The color drained from his face. Piers murmured, "This is an unfortunate misunderstanding." Verity turned to him. "You have used that word too often, Lord Piers. It is beginning to sound rehearsed." For once, he had no immediate reply. She went to the table and gathered the copies of Mr. Fenwick's letters, leaving the maps and accounts untouched. "I shall remove myself from Redmere Park for a time." Alistair's composure failed, only for a second. "Enough. Where will you go?" "Briarwick Hall. Your godmother's house is scarcely prepared." "Neither was I." He absorbed that in silence. "You are my wife." "Yes. That is why you had the power to wound me more efficiently than anyone else in this room." Mr. Fallow shifted, embarrassed. Sir Edmund looked as though he wished himself several counties away. Piers lowered his eyes again, but Verity no longer cared what expression he hid. Alistair came nearer, stopping before propriety forced her to retreat. His voice dropped. "Do not leave like this. There is no comfortable way to leave a house where one has been doubted politely. Let me make it right. You cannot make trust right by asking me to surrender the object of your distrust." She turned toward the door. "Mrs. Vale and I will depart before evening." Alistair did not forbid it. Perhaps he knew he had lost the right. Perhaps, somewhere beneath panic and pride, he understood that command would finish what doubt had begun. When Verity left the library, the corridor seemed longer than it had in the morning. Servants looked away. By dusk, her trunks were strapped, her traveling cloak fastened, and the rosewood case locked beneath her gloved hand. Alistair stood at the foot of the stairs, pale in the amber hall light. "Take the carriage," he said, "and the outrider. The roads will be dark." She inclined her head. "Thank you." The courtesy hurt them both. As she stepped into the carriage, he reached once toward the door, then stopped short of touching it. Verity. She looked back. He had many words in his face. None reached his mouth in time. "Good night, Your Grace," she said. The carriage moved. Redmere Park receded behind her, its windows bright, its heart uncertain, its master standing alone beneath the lamps. Verity kept one hand on the brass key and the other on the sealed packet of letters. She had left as a duchess, not a fugitive. Yet as the wheels turned toward Briarwick Hall, London laughed, Piers plotted, and Alistair Merrow finally learned that a wife could be lost without ever leaving the law. Briarwick Hall had not expected a duchess after dark. It received Verity with cold sheets, banked fires, and the startled loyalty of servants who had once belonged to Lady Elspeth and still seemed to listen for her cane upon the floorboards. The house stood 8 miles from Redmere Park, smaller, older, and less impressed with itself, with ivy dark against the stone and a narrow drive that made even a ducal carriage lower its pace. Verity arrived beneath a moon veiled by thin cloud, her rosewood case on her lap, Mrs. Vale beside her, and the ache of Redmere still sitting where her heart ought to have been. No one asked whether she had quarrelled with her husband. That was the kindness of old servants. They saw a woman arrive, pale and straight-backed, and they understood that dignity could be more fragile than tears. By morning, however, Verity had no time for fragility. She had the drawing-room opened, a fire lit, and Lady Elspeth's old writing desk set near the window for light. Mrs. Vale brought tea she forgot to drink. A maid laid out paperweights, sealing wax, and a magnifying glass with a cracked tortoise-shell handle. Outside, the gardens lay silvered with frost, all clipped hedges and bare branches, but inside the room the past had begun to speak in ink. Verity spread Mr. Fenwick's copies beside Lady Elspeth's private packet, which had been hidden for months in the false bottom of the rosewood case. Her godmother's final note lay on top, folded into quarters, the handwriting thin from illness, but still unmistakably severe. "My dear Verity," it began, "men who call themselves guardians often guard only their access to another person's property. Do not confuse family proximity with loyalty." Verity read the sentence 3 times before allowing herself to continue. Lady Elspeth had suspected Lord Piers not from one act, but from many small conveniences, a valuation that undervalued the southern woods, a proposed sale to an unnamed buyer, a clerk seen twice at an office connected to Mr. Cresswell Dane, a message delayed, a reply never acknowledged. The final lines were less accusation than warning. If Redmere can be saved, it must be saved from inside the house as well as outside it. Trust the law where you can. Trust character where you must. Trust a man only after he has lost something and chosen honor anyway. Verity sat very still. Mrs. Vale watched her across the desk. "She did not want you frightened," the companion said. Then she should not have known so many frightening things. Lady Elspeth considered ignorance more dangerous than fear. She was usually right. Verity drew the wax impressions closer. Mr. Fenwick had copied the seal mark from the letter receipts. Lady Elspeth's packet contained an older impression from the Halverstone household seal, sent years earlier in perfectly ordinary correspondence. At first glance, they matched. Under the glass, they did not. One edge of the crest had a tiny split near the lion's tail, a flaw in the true household seal. The receipt mark lacked it. Verity leaned closer. Mrs. Vale, the older woman, came around the desk. Verity pointed. "This was not made from the household seal." Mrs. Vale looked once, then again. "A copy, or a signet cut to resemble it. Who would dare?" Verity thought of Piers standing in her breakfast room, asking to examine the deed before he had earned even the right to see its ribbon, a man who expected no woman to compare marks under a glass. She reached for Lady Elspeth's note again and found, tucked behind the last page, a small memorandum she had missed before. 3 words had been underlined: "Vellum signet case." Beneath them, Lady Elspeth had written, "Ask Hargreaves, who had it repaired." Verity's pulse quickened, not with fear now, but with direction. The door opened after a knock, and Mrs. Vale received a card from the footman. Her expression changed before she spoke. "His Grace is outside." Verity looked toward the window. At the far end of the drive stood Alistair, not in the carriage. not beneath the shelter of the portico, but on the gravel in the cold morning air. His hat was in his hand. His dark coat was damp at the shoulders from mist. Behind him waited one groom and no grand procession. The sight unsettled her. It would have been easier had he arrived with command. How long has he been there? Nearly 20 minutes, Your Grace. He told Thomas not to disturb you until you chose to be disturbed. Verity closed Lady Elspeth's note. Then he may wait 5 minutes more. Mrs. Vale's mouth softened. Very good. It was not cruelty that made Verity delay. It was the need to feel the shape of her own choice before his regret entered the room and bent the air around it. She gathered the papers, locked the rosewood case, and kept only the magnifying glass and the copied seal impressions on the desk. When she finally entered the hall, Alistair stood beyond the open door, as still as though the threshold were a border he had no right to cross. His face looked different in daylight without Redmere behind him. Less like a duke defending a house, more like a man who had discovered that a house could echo after one woman left it. "Good morning," he said. "Is it?" His mouth tightened. "No." The answer was simple enough to disarm her for one dangerous second. She did not step back, but neither did she step aside. "Why are you here?" "To ask whether I may speak with you. Not to bring me home? I have no right to bring you anywhere." Wind moved faintly through the bare trees behind him. Verity heard a horse stamp in the drive. "That is new knowledge." "Yes." He took the rebuke without defense. "I earned it badly." She looked at his damp coat, his bare hand holding his hat, the restraint in every line of him. "You may come into the hall, not the drawing room yet." He bowed his head once and crossed the threshold only after she moved aside. The entrance hall smelled of beeswax and lavender, Lady Elspeth's old habits, preserved by servants who had loved her. Alistair noticed the portrait above the stair, the austere woman in black silk who seemed to be judging him from the grave. "She would have disliked me," he said. "She disliked most men on principle until they improved. Then she was wise." Verity turned toward him. "I found her final note." His attention sharpened. "May I read it?" She studied him. "No, not yet." A flicker crossed his face, but he nodded. "Then tell me what you wish me to know." That was better, painfully better. She suspected Piers of arranging a forced sale of the southern lands to Cresswell Dane through an intermediary. She also suspected the false receipt was made with a copied seal. Not the true household seal. Alistair's eyes narrowed. A copied seal would require access to the crest and a skilled engraver, or a signet case repaired by someone willing to remember the commission. Hargreaves may know. Lady Elspeth thought so. He looked toward the closed drawing-room door, behind which the papers waited. "I should have listened when you said someone had buried the truth." "Yes, I should have trusted you before the creditors asked me to doubt you." "Yes." His face tightened, but he did not look away. "I came to say that before asking anything else." The words sat between them. Not large, not beautiful, but solid. Verity wished they had been enough. She wished one honest apology could undo the sight of him hesitating while men measured her dignity like a negotiable paper. "I believe you regret it," she said. "I don't yet know what your regret can carry." "Then let me carry what I can without demanding the rest." She folded her hands. "What does that mean?" "Two trusted men remain on the road at the bend, out of sight, not to watch you, to ensure Piers cannot send anyone here unobserved. I told them they answer to you if you choose to use them." Verity looked at him sharply. "You arranged guards and then asked permission afterward." "I arranged distance. Permission is yours." It was imperfect, It was also an effort to protect without enclosing her. She hated that she understood the difference. Before she could answer, hooves sounded fast on the drive. A boy from Redmere village arrived breathless with a folded notice sealed in red wax. The footman brought it in, and Verity broke it open under Alistair's eyes. Lord Piers Vellum, acting in concern for the dignity of House of Halverstone and the peace of the county, requested the attendance of principal families, creditors, and local gentlemen at Halverstone House in 3 days' time. To consider the uncertainty surrounding Her Grace's claim to authority over Redmere lands. Verity read the line twice. Then she laughed once without humour. My fitness is to be considered like a cracked roof. Alistair's face had gone cold in a way she was beginning to recognise as danger directed elsewhere. He has no authority to call such a gathering. Authority is not what he wants. An audience is. Their eyes met. For the first time, the thought between them was shared before spoken. Piers did not mean merely to dispute the deed. He meant to put Verity on trial before everyone whose opinion could damage her. Alistair folded the notice with controlled care. Then he will have an audience. Verity held out her hand. He returned the paper at once. That mattered too. No, she said. We will decide what he has. Outside, the mist thinned over Briarwick's cold garden, and beyond it, Redmere waited with its locked rooms, forged notices, and frightened tenants. Verity stood in Lady Elspeth's hall with her husband before her, and danger approaching in a proper coat. She had not forgiven him, she had not returned, but for the first time since she left, she saw that he was no longer asking how to regain control. He was asking where she wished to stand. The morning after Lord Piers announced his gathering, Briarwick Hall became quieter than any battlefield Alistair had ever imagined. No one raised a voice. No door slammed. Yet every room seemed to understand that the next decision would either restore Verity's name or give society permission to finish ruining it. In Lady Elspeth's drawing room, the curtains were drawn back to admit a pale wash of winter light, and the small writing desk stood between Verity and Alistair like a witness. Mrs. Vale sat near the window with her needlework, present enough for propriety, silent enough for truth. On the desk lay copied letters, wax impressions, Mr. Fenwick's notes, and the narrow slip from Lady Elspeth naming the vellum signet case. Verity had not opened the rosewood case. Its brass key rested in her gloved hand, half hidden, not offered. Alistair saw it. He did not ask for it. That was the first test. If I attend Lord Piers's gathering, Verity said, I will not be placed at the end of the room like a disputed object. Alistair stood before the mantel, not too near her, his posture disciplined and his face tired from a night without rest. No, I will not have men decide whether I may speak about land I legally protect. No. And if I am accused, you will not answer every charge before I have opened my mouth. That one cost him. She saw it in the slight movement of his hand against his coat. He had been bred to command rooms, to silence insult, to shield what belonged to him, to stand beside her and let her face. The first blade went against rank, instinct, and whatever remorse had begun to grow in him. I will not speak over you, he said. Verity studied him. Even if they insult me, especially then if you wish to answer. And if I falter, his eyes softened, not with pity, but with pain held carefully back. Then I will be there, but I won't take your voice, because I fear hearing it tremble. Mrs. Vale's needle paused once, then moved again. Verity looked down at the key in her palm. It had marked her skin with a shallow curve. Lady Elspeth left a final note. Alistair's gaze went to the locked case, then returned to her face. You said I might not read it. I said not yet. She unlocked the case, removed the folded paper, and held it for a moment before passing it across the desk. The brass key remained in her other hand. His eyes lowered to it, and she waited for the old Alistair to appear. The Duke who would ask why she trusted him with one paper, but not the means to the rest. He did not. He unfolded the note with care and read in silence. The room seemed to breathe around him. Verity watched each change pass across his face, the tightening at Lady Elspeth's warning, the cold focus at Cresswell Dane's name, the visible shame at the line about a man who must lose something and choose honor anyway. When he finished, he folded the note exactly as he had received it and placed it back on the desk, not nearer himself, not nearer her. Between them, she understood me too well for a woman I barely knew, he said. She understood pride. You were not her first example. The corner of his mouth moved without becoming a smile. I wish she had liked me. She might have, eventually. That is more charity than I deserve. It is not charity. It is possibility. There is a difference. He looked at her then, and the quiet between them changed. Not healed, not easy, but less defended. Verity reached for the papers Mr. Fenwick had prepared and laid them out one by one. If Redmere is to survive this without becoming a weapon between us, the income from the southern lands must be placed under a protective settlement. Tenant security first, wage arrears second, estate repairs third. No speculative sale without my written consent and yours. No timber cutting from the old park woods without review. No use of my deed as collateral for debts I did not create. Alistair listened without interruption. And your separate rights? He asked. Verity's throat tightened, though she did not show it. He had named the point before she forced him to. Recognized in writing, not merely tolerated while convenient. Agreed. You have not heard every term. I have heard enough to know you are not trying to strip the estate. You are trying to keep it from devouring everyone attached to it. The words struck too near tenderness. She looked away first. Do not make me noble because you are ashamed. I am angry as well. I know, I want justice, so do I. No, she said softly, you want correction. Justice is more costly. He accepted that in silence. Then he moved to the chair opposite her and sat only after she inclined her head. Tell me the cost. Verity drew a breath. If Lord Piers is exposed, he must be removed from every estate function, not quietly sent abroad with an allowance. Agreed. If a clerk threatened Mrs. Bell, he must say who ordered him, and the tenants must hear the truth from us. Agreed. If Cresswell Dane is connected to this, his name cannot be hidden, because gentlemen dislike admitting they nearly sold themselves to a tradesman with sharper teeth. A faint hardness returned to Alistair's eyes, but it was not aimed at her. Agreed. And if you speak tomorrow, she said, you will not say that you trust me merely because I am your wife. That is not proof. Men have trusted wives with jewels and mistrusted them with power for centuries. He leaned forward slightly. What would you have me say? The truth. That I doubted you when I should have doubted, Piers. Yes, that you protected Redmere before I understood what protection required. Yes, that the shame is mine before it is yours. Verity's fingers closed around the key. If you believe that, I do. The answer came without hesitation. It should have soothed her. Instead, it frightened her because she wanted to believe it. She rose and crossed to the window, where frost still clung to the lawn in pale threads. Beyond Briarwick's garden, the road curved toward Redmere and every waiting accusation. Alistair did not follow. That, too, mattered. When you said you feared losing Redmere, Because you did not know how to ask anyone to stay, she said. Did you mean me? His answer was quiet. Not at first. She closed her eyes. Honesty could wound even when gently given. And now I know the estate was the name I gave to every fear I was too proud to confess. His voice was nearer, though he had not moved far. I feared being the Duke who failed his house. Then I feared being the husband who could not be forgiven by the woman who had seen the failure clearly. Redmere was never only land to me, but you were never only the means to save it. I was too blind to know that before I hurt you. Verity turned. He stood several paces away, one hand resting on the back of a chair as if to keep himself from coming closer. That is almost a beautiful apology, she said. Pain flickered in his eyes. Almost? A beautiful apology asks to be admired. I need an honest one that can work. Then give me work. The simplicity of it nearly undid her. She looked down at her hand and opened it. The brass key lay across her palm, old and dull and heavy with every choice that had brought them here. Alistair's gaze dropped to it. He did not reach. May I take your hand? He asked. The question entered the room more softly than any vow. Mrs. Vale became deeply interested in a knot of thread. Verity could say no. The knowledge steadied her enough to say, for a moment. Alistair came closer and took her free hand, not the hand that held the key. His touch was warm through her glove, restrained and careful, as if he understood that permission was not possession. Neither of them spoke. For several breaths, the marriage that had been a bargain, a wound, and a battlefield became only two people standing in a cold room, trying to learn where trust might begin after pride had ruined the easy road. Verity withdrew first. He let her go at once. I will stand beside you, she said. Not behind you, beside me, he repeated. And if I forget, I will remind you in front of everyone. For the first time in days, something like amusement touched his mouth. I don't doubt it. A hard knock broke the fragile warmth. Mrs. Vale rose and received a folded paper from the footman. The seal was black, pressed with the vellum crest. Verity opened it. The message contained only one line: surrender the deed before the gathering, or His Grace will learn what disgrace truly costs. Alistair read it over her shoulder without touching her. The room darkened around the words. Verity folded the threat once and placed it with the other evidence. He thinks I will choose your name over my own. Alistair's voice was cold. He thinks I will let you. She looked at him, at the man who had failed her and was now learning the price of standing correctly. Tomorrow, she said, we let him discover both mistakes. Halverstone House had been arranged to make judgment look respectable. By 3 o'clock, every chair in the great drawing room had been placed with mathematical cruelty, not in circles for conversation, but in ranks facing the marble hearth, as though the county had been invited to watch a sermon, a trial, or an execution of reputation. Verity entered on Alistair's arm, though she had made him wait until she chose to take it. She wore deep green silk, not mourning, not apology, and the old brass key rested inside her glove, where its shape pressed against her palm. The deed itself remained locked in the rosewood case, carried by Mrs. Vale and placed on a side table within Verity's sight. Pierre's threat lay folded among the evidence in Alistair's inner pocket, beside copies of the missing letters, the false seal marks, and the notice that had frightened Redmere village. Verity did not look at him when they crossed the threshold, but she felt him beside her, exact in step, silent in promise. The room was already full. Sir Edmund Rakeley stood near the window, pale with the anxiety of a banker who wished to be on the winning side before knowing which side that was. Mr. Fallow sat with both hands on his cane. Mr. Lydgate, the vicar from Redmere, had come in his black coat, his face grave but kind. Several county ladies had arrived to witness disgrace while pretending concern for order. Lord Piers Vellum stood before the hearth as if the house had granted him authority by the mere fact of his confidence. His eyes moved first to Alistair, then to the Rosewood case, then finally to Verity. "Your Graces," he said, bowing with exquisite care, "I am relieved you chose to attend." "You issued a summons without authority," Alistair said. "Attendance is not obedience." A small stir passed through the room. Piers smiled with faint sorrow. Authority becomes a delicate matter when the county no longer knows where authority rests. Verity felt Alistair's arm tense beneath her hand. She released him and stepped half a pace forward, not ahead of him, not behind him, enough to stand as herself. "Then let us speak plainly, Lord Piers. Delicacy has served lies better than truth these past days." Piers' gaze sharpened. "Plainly, then. We are gathered because Redmere Park, an ancient seat of House of Halverstone, has been thrown into public confusion by private papers. Sudden claims, frightened tenants, vanished, correspondence, and the influence of a lady whose good intentions may have exceeded her understanding. My understanding has troubled you since breakfast," Verity said. A few eyes flickered. Piers inclined his head. "Your Grace mistakes concern for opposition." "No, I mistake neither." Piers turned toward the room, opening one hand in a graceful appeal. "You all know my affection for this family. I was born under its protection. I have served His Grace through difficult years, when creditors, repairs, and old obligations pressed heavily upon him. I do not speak from malice. I speak because a desperate estate is vulnerable, and vulnerable estates attract manipulation." Alistair shifted, but Verity lifted her gloved fingers slightly. He stopped. Piers noticed, so did half the room. She let them notice. "Whom do you accuse of manipulation?" she asked. "I accuse no one," Piers replied. "Not yet. I merely ask why Lady Elspeth, Aveling in her decline, was permitted to transfer grave authority over Redmere lands to a young woman shortly before that woman married the Duke most affected by it. Permitted by whom? By advisers who may have understood the profit in confusion. Name them." His smile cooled. "Mr. Fenwick, perhaps, or those around him. Convenient, he is not yet in the room. He was invited. By you, by necessity." Verity moved to the side table and took one copied letter from the packet. 3 letters were sent to His Grace before the wedding. One from Mr. Fenwick, one from my marriage solicitor, one from Lady Elspeth herself. All explained the deed. All were signed for by a mark claiming Halverstone authority. His Grace received none of them. Piers sighed. Lost letters are regrettable, but hardly proof of villainy. Then let us add forged rent notices. She placed the village notice where several guests could see it. These were posted in my name, threatening tenants with removal. Mrs. Bell and others were told the new Duchess meant to raise rents before Lady Day. The language matches phrasing found in ledgers you handled. Estate language is often repetitive. And your clerk? Piers's expression did not change. Which clerk? The narrow-faced man who stood behind you at the churchyard and would not meet Mrs. Bell's eyes. A servant of business can hardly be held responsible for every fear repeated by villagers. Mr. Lydgate stood. I heard Mrs. Bell's statement myself, Lord Piers. Piers bowed toward him. And I honor your compassion, Mr. Lydgate. But compassion is not evidence. No, Verity said. Fear is not evidence. Compassion is not evidence. A woman's word is apparently not evidence. So I brought questions. She faced Piers fully. Who told the scandal sheet that I paid delayed wages from my private account? The room stilled. Piers's eyes narrowed by the smallest degree. Did you? Answer me. If such a thing occurred, many servants might have known. Who told them that the deed rested in my Rosewood case? The existence of the case is scarcely secret. Who knew that the ribbon had been reteed after someone touched it? For the first time, Piers did not answer at once. Verity felt Alistair's attention like a hand at her back, though he remained where he had promised to remain. Sir Edmund cleared his throat, then thought better of speaking. Piers gave a soft laugh. Duchess, you weave household trifles into conspiracy because you dislike scrutiny. I dislike cowardice, she said. Scrutiny I prepared for. Piers's charm thinned. Then prepare for this. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. The movement was practiced. The room leaned toward it before anyone meant to move. A statement has been provided by a former maid in Lady Elspeth's household. The maid confirms that her ladyship was confused in her final weeks, that papers were placed before her when she was too ill to comprehend them, and that her grace here was present more than once during such signings. The words entered the room with poisonous elegance. Verity felt them strike the faces around her. Confusion, illness. A young woman near papers. It was not merely an accusation of fraud. It was an accusation of cruelty toward the woman who had loved her. Alistair took one step forward. Verity did not lift her hand this time. She turned her head and looked at him. Just once. Stay. His face went rigid with the cost of obedience, but he stayed. Piers read aloud. The maid's name was Mary Dace. The statement claimed that Lady Elspeth had not known the nature of the deed transfer on the 6th of February. It claimed Verity had dismissed servants from the room. It claimed Mr. Fenwick had whispered instructions while Lady Elspeth signed. A lady near the back gasped softly. Mr. Fallow muttered, "Good heavens!" Verity waited until the final word fell. She could feel the room wanting her to tremble. It expected tears. It expected outrage. It expected a woman defending love to sound guilty, because love could not be entered in a ledger. She gave them neither. "May I see the statement?" Piers hesitated. "I have no objection, provided it is returned." Alistair moved then, not to speak over her, but to take the paper from Piers and hand it to Verity with a bow that made the act visible to every person present. He was not granting permission. He was honoring hers. Verity read the statement quickly. Then she read the date again, February 6th. The first true relief of the afternoon passed through her so quietly that no one saw it. "Lord Piers," she said, "when did Mary Dace leave Lady Elspeth's service? I cannot be expected to know the movements of every maid. But you can produce her confession, a confession brought to me by a reliable source." "How reliable?" Enough to forget that Mary Dace left Briarwick Hall on the 2nd of February to nurse her married sister in Canterbury. Piers went still. "Servants sometimes return. Not this one. She was entered in the parish relief account there on the 5th. Mr. Lydgate can speak to the form, if not the parish itself. Mr. Fenwick has the travel note." Mrs. Vale witnessed her departure. Piers recovered too quickly. Then perhaps the date was copied incorrectly. How fortunate that every error favors your accusation. A murmur moved across the room. Verity held up the paper. "This statement claims to remember a signing witnessed by a maid who was not in the house. It claims Lady Elspeth was confused on a day when the doctor's own note says she was reading correspondence aloud and correcting his Latin. It claims I dismissed servants from a room where Mrs. Vale sat the entire afternoon. Piers's face hardened beneath the polish. "You are very practiced, Duchess." "No, I am very tired." The answer quieted the room more than anger would have done. "Tired of being called fortunate when I was useful. Tired of being called sentimental when I am precise. Tired of men misplacing papers and then calling my memory suspicious." Alistair looked at her then with an expression so open she had to look away before it weakened her. Piers's voice sharpened. "Careful, Your Grace. A display of feeling will not strengthen your claim, nor has your display of concern strengthened yours." At that moment, the drawing-room doors opened. Every head turned. Dowager Duchess Octavia Merrow entered in black silk, tall, silver-haired, and terrible in her composure. Beside her stood a woman in a plain brown dress and bonnet, her gloved hands twisting together with visible fear. Verity recognized her from Lady Elspeth's last months, though time and distress had thinned her face. Mary Dace. Piers's colour changed. Not much. Enough. The Dowager looked around the room and then settled her gaze on Lord Piers. "I dislike arriving late," she said, "but I dislike forged testimony even more." Mary Dace lifted her eyes, trembling but present. "Your Grace," she whispered to Verity, "I never signed that paper." Mary Dace's whispered denial did what every accusation before it had failed to do. It made the room ashamed of its own appetite. The county ladies who had leaned forward for scandal drew back into their chairs. Sir Edmund Rakeley lowered his gaze. Mr. Fallow's fingers had tightened around his cane until the knuckles showed white. Lord Piers Vellum alone remained almost still, though the colour beneath his polished skin had changed from healthy confidence to something thinner. Verity did not move toward Mary at once. The former maid looked ready to break under too much attention, and Verity knew too well what it meant to be surrounded by people, waiting to decide whether one's pain sounded believable. Dowager Duchess Octavia placed a steady hand at Mary's elbow. "Speak clearly, child," she said. "You are under my protection in this room." Mary swallowed. "I never signed that paper. I left Briarwick Hall before the day it says." Her ladyship was ill, yes, but she knew her own mind. She knew the deed. "She spoke of it to me when I brought her broth," she said. "Miss Verity must never be made to feel like payment for a man's pride." The words went through Verity with such sharp tenderness that she almost looked away. She did not. She held herself still for Lady Elspeth, for Mary, for every woman in the room who had ever watched men call her memory uncertain, because her truth inconvenienced them. Piers gave a short, soft laugh. "A touching recollection. But servants can be persuaded to remember what great ladies require." Octavia's eyes became winter itself. "Indeed, that is why I brought the man who tried to persuade her." The doors opened again, and Mr. Fenwick entered with a clerk beside him, narrow-faced, pale, and visibly miserable. It was the man from the churchyard. Alistair's expression hardened, but he did not step forward. Not yet. Mr. Fenwick bowed to Verity first, then to Alistair, then to the room. "Your Graces, I apologize for the delay. This young man, Mr. Abel Trent, presented himself at my office this morning after receiving assurance that he would not be left alone with Lord Piers's version of events." Piers' cane tapped once against the floor. "This is farce." "No," Verity said. "Farce is forged testimony with the wrong date. This is consequence." Abel Trent stared at the carpet. "I copied the statement. I did not write the words first." His voice shook, but it carried. "Lord Piers gave me the draft," he said. Mary Dace had agreed but could not travel. "He told me to prepare it fair, with her mark added from an older receipt." Mary made a small sound. Octavia tightened her hand on the woman's arm. Piers turned on the clerk with elegant disgust, a dismissed clerk inventing tales to save himself. "Dismissed yesterday, my lord," Mr. Fenwick said. "Threatened last night. Paid last week." He placed a folded paper on the table. The payment came through an account connected to Mr. Cresswell Dane. The name moved through the room like smoke. Men who had pretended not to know it now knew it too well. Alistair finally spoke. Cresswell Dane sought to purchase the southern lands. Piers looked at him. "Many men seek many things. Through you. Careful, Alistair." "No." Alistair's voice was quiet, but every person in the room heard the Duke in it. "You will address me as Your Grace, while you answer for using my house, my seal, and my wife's name." Piers' face tightened. Alistair took the folded threat from his inner pocket and placed it beside the forged statement. This was sent to Briarwick Hall. "Surrender the deed, or I would learn what disgrace costs. Only a coward threatens a woman through her husband's name because he fears facing her own." Verity's breath caught, not because of the insult to Piers, but because Alistair had named the threat as hers to answer, not merely his to avenge. Mr. Fenwick opened his folio and laid out the copies of the 3 missing letters. These were sent before the wedding. The receipts bear an imitation of the Halverstone household seal. The true seal has a flaw near the lion's tail. The receipt mark does not. Lady Elspeth noted before her death that Lord Piers's signet case had been repaired by an engraver in Holborn. Octavia lifted one gloved hand. "I visited that engraver yesterday." Piers stared at her. For the first time, fear broke through his polish. "You had no right." "I have every right to dislike fools who underestimate old women." A few nervous breaths passed through the room, almost laughter and almost fear. Octavia continued. "He remembered the commission because the gentleman insisted the copied crest must be exact enough for correspondence, but not official plate. He identified your man, Piers, and your clerk has identified you." Piers' charm vanished. What remained was a bitter, cornered resentment that seemed older than the scandal. "You all speak as if I acted from greed alone. What was I to do? Watch Halverstone collapse while Alistair buried himself in pride and creditors. Watch an Aveling woman walk in with papers and reduce blood to permission." Verity looked at him steadily. "There it is," his eyes cut to her. "You have no idea what this family is. I know what you were willing to do to keep your place near it." "My place?" he laughed once. "I was the useful cousin, the poor relation with a better head for accounts than any of them. I kept the wolves away while His Grace mourned the estate as if mourning could pay interest." Cresswell Dane offered a solution. Sell the southern lands quietly, settle the worst notes, preserve the appearance of greatness. "And the tenants?" Verity asked. "Tenants survive change. Widows do not survive your kind of change easily." "Sentiment, responsibility," she said. "You confuse them because you have practiced neither." The room held its breath. Alistair stepped beside Verity, not before her. "Lord Piers Vellum," he said, "from this hour you are removed from every matter touching Redmere Park, Halverstone House, the southern lands, and any account bearing my name. Mr. Fenwick will prepare notice to all creditors that you hold no authority. Mr. Carow will review every ledger you touched. Mr. Trent will make a sworn statement before the proper solicitor. Mr. Dane will receive no meeting, no courtesy," and Piers's mouth twisted. "You would ruin family for her." The silence after that was vast. Alistair turned not to Piers, but to the room. He looked at the county families, the creditors, the vicar, the servants at the edges, his mother, Mary Dace, and finally Verity, I have already ruined enough by failing her. Verity felt the words before she understood them. Alistair's voice remained steady, but something in him had lowered itself before all of them, not in theatrical shame, in truth. The Duchess of Halverstone did not deceive this house. I did. I deceived myself, because it was easier to believe I had married a solution than to ask why a woman of honor had chosen to stand in a failing estate and do the work I was too proud to see. She paid wages I had allowed to fall late. She protected tenants I had left vulnerable to other men's convenience. She preserved the southern lands before I understood how close they had come to being sold in pieces. I doubted her when I should have doubted the man who profited from my fear. He turned to Verity then. His eyes were open, unguarded, and entirely without demand. The shame in this room is not my wife's. Verity could not speak. She had imagined public defense. She had not imagined public humility. The difference trembled through her like a bell struck at a distance. Piers made one last attempt. Pretty words. They will not alter debt. No, Alistair said, but truth alters who is permitted near it. Sir Edmund rose slowly. Your Grace, in light of what has been presented, the bank will recognize only your direct instruction, and Her Grace's lawful interest in the protected lands. Mr. Fallow nodded, eager now to be correct. My firm as well, Mr. Lydgate stepped forward. I will tell the parish that the notices were false and that Her Grace's promise stands. Mary Dace began to cry quietly, not with spectacle, but relief. Verity crossed to her then and took her hands. You were brave to come. Mary shook her head. I was frightened. Bravery often is. Behind them, Piers stood alone, and that loneliness was its own sentence. He had not been dragged down by a shout, but by evidence, memory, and the women he had expected to frighten. Octavia looked at the butler. See Lord Piers out. His carriage may be brought around. If it is not ready, the walk to the inn is less than 1 mile and may improve his humility. Piers bowed stiffly, but no one returned it with warmth. When he passed Alistair, he murmured, You will regret making an enemy of me. Alistair answered, No, I regret mistaking you for a friend. The door closed after him. The room did not erupt. No applause came, no vulgar triumph, only the slow, solemn rearrangement of truth in every face. Verity returned to the side table and unlocked the rosewood case. She took out the brass key, held it in her palm, and looked at Alistair. Redmere is not saved yet. No, he said, but it has stopped lying to itself. She looked around the room that had been arranged to judge her, and saw, at last, that judgment had changed direction. Then she closed her fingers around the key. Then let us see whether Redmere can become a home. 3 weeks after Lord Piers' vellum was shown from Halverstone's house, Redmere Park opened its doors without pretending nothing had happened. That was Verity's first condition. There would be no ball, no musicians hired to drown out shame, no glittering crush of guests invited to admire a reconciliation they had not earned the right to witness. Instead, trestle tables were set in the old servants' hall and along the covered passage near the kitchens, where the stone floor had been scrubbed, the fires built high, and enough candles lit to make winter seem briefly generous. Tenants came with cautious faces and clean collars. Servants moved with the strange pride of people whose wages had been paid before apologies were spoken. Mrs. Bell arrived with both children, carrying a jar of preserved plums as if a duchess required tribute, and as if gratitude, properly offered, might steady the giver as much as the receiver. Verity accepted it with both hands. You brought this from your own stores? She asked. Mrs. Bell coloured. It's not much, Your Grace. It is your kindness that makes it considerable." The widow's eyes filled, but this time she smiled through it. Across the room, Alistair watched without intruding. He had learned, slowly and not without effort, that every generous act did not require a duke to stand at the center of it. He had spent the past weeks doing quieter work. Mr. Caro's ledgers had been reviewed. The forged notices had been gathered from every cottage and burned in the stable yard. Before Mr. Lydgate, Mrs. Bell, and 3 tenant witnesses, Abel Trent had made his sworn statement before Mr. Fenwick. Mr. Cresswell Dane had discovered that ancient houses could be foolish, but not always defenseless. Piers's remaining authority had been cut from the estate like rot from wood, and though society did not stop whispering at once, the whispers changed shape. That, Verity had discovered, was one of the small pleasures of justice. People who once used rumor like a knife began using apology like a fan, fluttering it whenever she entered a room. She accepted very few of them. Some debts, she thought, were best left unpaid because the creditor had finally learned their cost. The tenant's supper was not grand. It was better than grand. There were roasted meats, bread still warm from the ovens, winter apples, stewed onions, and plum pudding set aflame to the delighted terror of several children. The Dowager Duchess Octavia sat beside Mr. Lydgate and listened to his parish concerns with the expression of a monarch receiving dispatches. Mrs. Vale, stationed near the wall, pretended not to enjoy the housekeeper's excellent punch. Alistair moved among the tenants with a humility so restrained that no one could mistake it for performance. He spoke to the carpenter about roof timbers. He asked the dairywomen whether the new fuel allotment had reached them. When Mrs. Bell's son dropped a spoon and flushed crimson, the Duke picked it up himself and handed it back as if silver had fallen before him every day, and rank had no objection to bending. Verity saw the boy's awe. She saw Alistair see it too, and choose not to make the moment larger than the child could bear. That was new. Later, when the last dishes had been carried away and the household was warm with food, cider, and relief, Verity stood at the end of the hall with a folded paper in her hand. The room quieted before she asked it to. She looked not at Alistair first, but at the people whose fear had been used as a tool. Lady Elspeth Aveling believed Redmare Park could not be saved by preserving stone while neglecting those who lived beneath its roof and worked upon its land, she said. Her voice carried clearly. In her name, and with His Grace's agreement, a widow's fund will be established from the protected income of the southern lands. It will not be charity offered when convenient. It will be an obligation recorded and maintained. Mrs. Bell covered her mouth. Another woman began to weep quietly. Mr. Lydgate bowed his head. Verity continued before emotion could soften the promise into sentiment. The wage arrears are settled. Tenancy notices must be properly witnessed. No woman shall be threatened in my name again without finding me at her door asking who dared. A ripple moved through the hall, half laughter, half relief. Then Alistair stepped beside her, not ahead. Never ahead now unless danger required it and she allowed it. "The Duchess speaks with my full authority," he said. A faint smile touched Verity's mouth. He glanced at her, and something private passed between them, quick as candlelight. "And with her own," he added. That was when the applause came, not from London society, not from polished guests in a ballroom, but from tenants, servants, widows, grooms, dairywomen, and the children who understood justice first by the look on their mothers' faces. Verity lowered her eyes for one breath, not from shame this time, but because being honored honestly required more courage than enduring insult. When she looked up, Alistair was watching her with an expression that asked for nothing. That was why it gave so much. Near midnight, after the tenants had gone home with wrapped bread and warm hands, after the dowager had retired with Mrs. Vale and declared the evening almost tolerable, Verity returned to the breakfast room alone. The house was quiet. Not empty, quiet. There was a difference. The same long table stood beneath the pale glow of 2 lamps. The same sideboard held silver. The same windows looked out upon the dark sweep of Redmere's lawns, yet the room no longer felt like a place built to measure distance. A small fire burned in the grate, and on the table lay the final settlement papers, signed that afternoon in Mr. Fenwick's careful presence. Verity's separate rights were recognized. Redmere's protected income was bound first to obligations, not vanity. The old park woods could not be cut to satisfy careless debt. No speculative sale could proceed without her consent and Alistair's. It was not romance written in legal ink. It was respect made difficult to ignore. She heard the door open behind her. She did not turn at once. "I wondered whether you would come here," Alistair said. "It seemed appropriate. Because this is where I hurt you first. Because this is where I understood that I had not been invisible by accident." He came no farther than the end of the table. "May I?" "Yes." He entered and closed the door softly. In his hand was the old brass key. Verity looked at it, then at him. "You took that from the case?" "No." He held it out on his open palm. "You left it with the settlement papers. Mr. Fenwick gave it to me and said, with unnecessary severity, that I should return what was not mine." Despite herself, Verity smiled. "Mr. Fenwick has always had a gift for being correct unpleasantly. He terrifies me." "Good." Alistair came closer and placed the key on the table between them. Not in his pocket, not in her hand, between them. "I once thought this house needed saving from debt," he said. "Then from scandal, then from peers. I was slow to understand that it also needed saving from the habits that let men like peers seem useful, and from pride, most of all from mine." The answer was immediate. No polish, no defense. Verity touched the back of a chair. It was the one she had stood beside that morning, weeks ago, when his words had cut the marriage open and shown her the emptiness inside it. "What do you want, Alistair?" He drew in a careful breath. "I want you to stay." Pain moved through her before hope could. "Because Redmere needs me?" "Yes." He did not soften it. "Because the tenants need you. Because I need your judgment. Because this estate is better where your hand has touched it." He paused. "But those are not the reasons I am asking." She waited. He stepped no closer. "Stay because I love you. Stay because I would like to learn how to make a marriage where you are not grateful to be chosen, and I am not praised for choosing you. Stay because I want to practice love until it becomes more reliable than my pride." The room seemed to hold its breath. Verity looked down at the key. Once it had been evidence, then defense, then burden. Now it lay quietly in lamplight, asking to become something else. "Love practiced daily," she said, "not declared once. Yes, trust repaired in conduct. Yes, no gratitude used as a chain. Never." She searched his face, not for perfection, but for steadiness. She found fear there, and remorse, and tenderness held with discipline, because he knew tenderness did not entitle him to forgiveness. She also found patience. That mattered most. Verity picked up the brass key and walked to the door that connected the breakfast room to the inner passage. An old hook had been placed there that afternoon at her request. She hung the key upon it, not hidden in a case, not clutched in a palm visible present, part of the house. When she turned, Alistair had not moved. "I will stay," she said. His face changed so completely that she nearly had to look away. "Verity, do not thank me as if I have given you property." "I wasn't going to." "What were you going to say?" He came to her then, slowly enough that she could stop him, close enough that she could feel his warmth without feeling crowded by it. "I was going to say, I'll try to deserve tomorrow." She let him take her hand. This time, she did not set a limit of 1 moment. His fingers closed around hers with careful wonder, and in the quiet breakfast room, where a bargain had ended, a marriage began. Outside, Redmere Park rested under winter stars, no longer saved by secrecy, no longer ruled by fear, no longer waiting for a man's pride to call itself duty. Inside, beside the door, the old brass key caught the firelight, and Verity stood with her husband not as the woman who had been purchased, nor as the Duchess who had proved them wrong, but as the heart of a home finally honest enough to open.